Hello and welcome to Sipz and Stories. My name is Elizabeth and in today's video I will be discussing my summer TBR. So here is a list of books that I am currently reading and plan to read this summer. They include, of course, some classics, some children's books, and even some biography and short story collections. So grab your favorite beverage as I discuss my summer TBR. The first classic book on my summer TBR is Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. I was inspired to reread this classic tale of adventure after I watched the new television show starring David Tennant. And as much as I like that show, I do think it takes a lot of dramatic license, and it did make me want to go back and read the source material again. I don't think I have read Around the World in 80 Days since I was in high school, and I do remember it as just being a very fun adventure story. I also happened to pick up this beautiful new Penguin Clothbound Classics edition of the book, and I'm not a huge fan of the Penguin Clothbound Classics. I have the Jane Austen set and the Bronte set, but I don't collect them all the time like a lot of people do. But when I saw this edition of Around the World in 80 Days, I just had to have it. I just love that bright blue cover with the luggage tags from all over the world, from Japan and from San Francisco and from Asia. So cool, in Egypt. Then even the end papers are a lot of fun as well. That bright, cheerful yellow and then that yellow ribbon bookmark. I cannot wait to reread this classic story of adventure in this beautiful Penguin Clothbound Classics edition. If you're unfamiliar with Around the World in 80 Days, it is a fun book. I do recommend it if you are trying to break into classics. It's one of those classics I think is perfect for high schoolers or people that don't necessarily read classics because it is so much fun and it is so action-packed. The story is about an English gentleman named Phineas Fogg, and he makes a bet with all of the members of his club that he can circumnavigate the world in 80 days. And he takes along his humble yet adventurous manservant Passepartout, and they just have a number of adventures throughout Europe and India and Asia. I love those scenes in San Francisco and throughout the American West as well. And it's just a fun story. I love all of the movies too. It's fun to see how every movie interprets this book, from David Tennant to Jackie Chan to Pierce Brosnan and some of those old editions as well. It's just a really fun book. Another classic book I'll be reading this summer is Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, and this is one of my folio editions, which is why it doesn't have the title on the front cover. The title is on the side. I love this folio edition. In fact, it's probably one of my favorite folios. It's really big too. It's very hefty. It's very hard to hold up here with one hand. Of course, I will show you some close-up shots, but here you go. Here is a picture of the end papers, and there is one of the center illustrations. So beautiful and charming. So what is Three Men in a Boat about? I'm really not sure. I think it is about three men in a boat. It's constantly recommended to me in recommendations because I like P.G. Wodehouse, and at first I thought it was published in the 20s and 30s like P.G. Wodehouse, but it's not. It's actually a Victorian novel. It was published in 1889. How cool is that? So one of the first comedic novels in the English language that kind of has that witty feeling to it, because as you know, the Victorians were not really big on wit, so a very groundbreaking book for its time. And I think they are working in London at the beginning of the book and just feeling like run down and tired and listless, and they just want to have an adventure. And it does evoke that summertime feeling of taking their boat on this journey throughout the Thames. They take along their dog as well. The dog is supposed to be a character in this book, I've heard. And again, I think it has that kind of slapstick P.G. Wodehouse, Laurel and Hardy type of a vibe to it. Looking forward to reading this one this summer. Another classic that I would like to revisit this summer is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And the reason I wanted to reread this is I recently finished up the Mitford biography. I'm obsessed with the Mitford sisters now. And one of the Mitford sisters, Jessica Mitford, was a very prolific novelist herself, and she lived in San Francisco, and she was dear friends with Maya Angelou. And that really surprised me when I read that in the Mitford biography. And I think they have just one of the most special and unique, not only female friendships in history, but interracial friendships and literary friendships. So it did make me want to go back and revisit Maya Angelou's earlier work. I don't think I've ever read this book cover to cover. I read excerpts from this book. I was assigned to teach a few excerpts in this book from anthologies and things like that. Mainly her time in San Francisco when she was the cable car operator and she knew people like Martin Luther King. So it will be good for me to go back and revisit the beginning of this book. I think the reason I have avoided it is that it's about child abuse. It's about her rape as a child and how she doesn't speak for years and years after that. So I think that's why I've never wanted to read it, but I know it's a very deep and impactful book. I love this edition published by Random House, and it does have a foreword by Maya Angelou's protege, Oprah Winfrey. The back cover is stunning as well, with an old photograph of Maya Angelou when she was young. And just the colors on the front cover of the bird and the orange and the yellows, it really evokes that summertime feeling. Beautiful book with the French flaps and the deckled edges. Another book that I think goes along perfectly with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is this collection of Maya Angelou's poetry. I picked this one up a few years ago, and I think it is by the same publisher because they look really nice together, and it completes that theme of the rising sun, except this one has the purples and blues and greens. Maya Angelou, of course, is a very prolific poet. I think she was a poet laureate in San Francisco at one time. And I do invite you, if you're just not at all familiar with Maya Angelou, to go back on YouTube and watch some of those videos when she was young, reading some of her poetry, like Phenomenal Woman. I did have the pleasure several years ago of seeing her speak in San Francisco before she passed away, and it's just one of those memories that I will always cherish because she was such a special and inspiring woman. The next book that I recommend for summertime reading is the Hercule Poirot short stories by Agatha Christie. I believe that William Morrow came out with this a few years ago, and when it came out, I immediately bought it, but it's been sitting on my shelf ever since, and I finally am getting around to it this summer, as you can see by my bookmark. And I did not know what I was missing because as much as I love the Poirot novels, I don't think I've ever read any of the short stories. And they are so much fun. They just have that Poirot signature savoir-faire, him using the little gray cells. And most of the short stories, which makes them so fun, are narrated by Captain Hastings. So I do love that trifecta of Poirot and Captain Hastings and Inspector Japp. So most of the earlier stories feature all of those three characters, which I love. They're very easy to read as well. I recommend bringing this to the beach or the lake with you. I can usually read 2 or 3 of these stories in one sitting because they're easy and they're quick. A lot of them are favorites of mine now, especially the chocolate box. I really love when Agatha Christie gives you some sort of sympathy for the murderer. A lot of fun. And I cannot wait to polish off this classic collection of Poirot short stories this summer. Another adult novel, which I think is perfect for the summertime, is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. And I think I'm the last person on earth to have read this book, but I did want to recommend it during this summer TBR video because I think it's perfect for the summertime. I recently finished it a few weeks ago and I loved it. Not only is the setting perfect for summertime, it takes place on this island in the Cerulean Sea, but it is a very heartwarming story as well. So I know a lot of people love to read romance and thrillers during the summer, but if you're just looking for a fun story with a lot of humor and a lot of heart, I do think The House in the Cerulean Sea is a perfect read for the summertime. Also, I am now a big fan of T.J. Klune's writing style. He reminds me of just maybe a softer version of Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. Again, if you are a fan of Terry Pratchett, I think you'll like his writing style. In fact, even in this plot is very similar to a Terry Pratchett novel. It is about a man named Linus Baker. He's 40, he lives alone, and he is a caseworker for the Department of Magical Youth. So his boss sends him to this island where all these magical children live, including the Antichrist. And the Antichrist, Lucy, is hilarious. Lucy's only about 6 or 7 years old, but he is funnier than heck. And in fact, this book is worth reading just for Lucy's one-liners. And while Linus is there, he really bonds with these children, and he ends up forming a relationship with the children's caretaker, Arthur Parnassus. It's a really sweet story. It has some LGBTQ themes as well, so if you're into that, I think you'll enjoy this. But that being said, I just really liked the story. It was very heartwarming and really sweet little story about belonging and standing up for children. Loved this one. And finally, to finish off with some childhood classics, I recently acquired these republished Nancy Drew Applewood Books editions of the original Nancy Drew stories by Carolyn and Keene. If you compare them to the Grosset and Dunlap stories, they are 25 chapters instead of 20 chapters, and reading the original Nancy Drew stories is very fun and a very unique experience. The Grosset and Dunlap versions reprinted the original stories, but set them in the 1950s and 60s. The original stories are set in the 1930s during the Great Depression. And Nancy Drew was a hit right from the beginning because these books were published during the Great Depression. She was a great role model for young girls at that time, and she still remains a great role model. Nancy Drew is over 90 years old, so originally published in the 1930s and almost 100 years old in about 10 years or so. And I just love how this character has developed throughout the decades, and it really is a portrait of American history and American girls' stories. Again, the original Nancy Drew is very spunky. She does not have red hair. She has a blonde bob. She also drives around in her little blue roadster. And I think the stories are a little more dangerous than the Grosset and Dunlap versions. There's a lot more crooks and kidnapping and jewel thieves in the original stories. As fun as they are, they do deal with some negative aspects of the 1930s, and that would be, of course, racism. So there are a lot of maids and farm workers that happen to be African American in the original stories, and they are not treated well. So I am really happy that Applewood Books spoke to that in the publishing note at the beginning, and they chose not to edit those sections of the story out of these books so that they were presented in the real life version. And I do think that is important for kids to be exposed to things like that, as bad as it is, so that they can see how the character of Nancy Drew has developed over the years. I love Nancy Drew, and this one, The Secret of Shadow Ranch, is such a classic. I've read the 1950s version, but I've never read the original, so it'll be a lot of fun to read it this summer. The last set of children's books that I will be reading this summer is the Three Rancheros series by Kate DiCamillo. I absolutely fell in love with the first book in the series, Raymie Nightingale, during middle grade March. It was one of my favorite reads during middle grade March. So I immediately had to go out and buy the last two in the series, which is Louisiana's Way Home and Beverley Right Here. And these books are really interesting. They remind me of really great Southern fiction, but for kids. So if you like things like Fried Green Tomatoes or Yaya Sisterhood, I think you will really like the Three Rancheros series. They are set in the South. The first book is set in Florida. The second book, Louisiana Way Home, is set in Georgia. The first book is about when the three friends meet at the Little Miss Florida beauty contest, and it's very heartwarming and very deep. It starts off with Raymie's father has run off with his dental hygienist, and so Raymie innocently thinks that if she signs up for this beauty contest and she wins the beauty contest, that her father will come home. Obviously that doesn't happen, but she really ends up bonding with these two girls, Louisiana and Beverley. It's such a sweet story. Recently finished the second one, Louisiana's Way Home, and it deals with even some more deep topics than the first one. Very difficult topics, but I just like the way that Kate DiCamillo tells these stories through the eyes of children. This book does have a happy ending, I'll tell you that much, so don't feel weird about giving these to kids at all. I think this would be great read alouds with kids because Kate DiCamillo's writing is so stunning and so beautiful. It also features a lot of really strong characters and quirky characters, which is why I love these books so much. Now I cannot wait to finish the series with Beverley Right Here. Thank you again for joining me for my summer TBR. I am really excited about all of these books, some of which I've already started, like the Poirot short stories and the Three Rancheros series. I'm so excited to reread Around the World in 80 Days and discover new classics like Three Men in a Boat, and revisit some memoirs like I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I think all these books are perfect for summertime reading. Thank you everyone, and have a great day.